The rain had been falling over Seattle for 3 straight days when Jack Sullivan found the puppy. Most people hurried past without looking, heads lowered beneath umbrellas as cold winds swept through the city streets. Jack had nowhere to hurry to. At 62 years old, the homeless veteran spent his nights beneath an old overpass near Pioneer Square, carrying everything he owned in a worn backpack. When he heard a faint whimper coming from a dark alley, he almost thought he imagined it. Then he found the trembling golden puppy curled beside a dumpster, soaked by rain and shivering from the cold. Jack wrapped the tiny dog inside his jacket and carried it back to his shelter, believing he was simply saving a stray from a miserable night. The next morning, a missing child poster changed everything. The puppy in his arms belonged to a 9-year-old girl named Lily Anderson, who had vanished 3 days earlier. Suddenly, the man nobody noticed was holding the first real clue in the city's biggest search effort, and the little dog seemed determined to lead him somewhere. Cold autumn rain fell over Seattle in silver sheets, blurring the streetlights around Pioneer Square and turning the sidewalks into rivers of reflected neon. Jack Sullivan moved slowly beneath the old highway overpass with his hood pulled low, one hand gripping the strap of the worn military backpack that held nearly everything he owned. At 62 years old, Jack had the weathered look of a man shaped by hard roads and harder years. He was tall but slightly stooped now, with broad shoulders that hinted at the strength he once carried more easily, a gray beard trimmed unevenly with a pocket razor, and tired blue eyes that still noticed details most people missed. Decades earlier, he had served in the army, first as a mechanic, then as a convoy driver, in places where dust, fear, and distance became part of a man's bones. Coming home had not broken him all at once. It happened slowly. A back injury that ended steady work, a marriage that dissolved under financial strain, medical bills that stacked higher than hope, and finally a city apartment he could no longer afford. People saw the sleeping bag, the donated coat, the paper cup of coffee warming his hands on cold mornings, and decided they knew his whole story. Jack rarely corrected them. Pride was a heavy thing to carry when survival already weighed enough. That night, most of Seattle hurried past him without looking. Office workers crossed intersections under black umbrellas. Rideshare cars hissed through wet streets. A young couple stepped around him near a closed bakery, lowering their voices as if homelessness could be contagious. Jack kept moving toward the dry patch beneath the overpass where he usually slept, thinking only about staying warm until morning. Then he heard it. A faint sound from the alley beside an old brick building. At first he thought it was rainwater dripping through a loose pipe. Then it came again, thinner, weaker, almost swallowed by traffic. A whimper. Jack stopped. He turned toward the alley, squinting through the rain. "Hello?" he called quietly, though he did not expect a person to answer. The alley smelled of wet cardboard, garbage, and cold metal. Water ran along the cracked pavement toward a storm drain. Behind a dumpster, barely visible beneath a collapsed piece of soggy cardboard, something small trembled. Jack crouched slowly, ignoring the ache in his knees. 2 frightened brown eyes looked back at him. It was a puppy, maybe 5 or 6 months old, a golden retriever with soaked pale gold fur plastered flat against a thin body. Its ears hung low, its paws were muddy, and a small pink collar circled its neck. The puppy tried to back away, but was too cold to move far. Jack felt anger rise in his chest, quiet but sharp. "Who left you out here, little one?" he murmured. He eased off his jacket despite the cold and wrapped it around the puppy before lifting it carefully into his arms. The animal shivered violently against him, then pressed its face into his sweater as if it had been waiting for one person in the whole city to stop. Jack carried the puppy back beneath the overpass, where his small camp sat tucked behind a concrete pillar. There was a blue tarp tied overhead, a sleeping bag rolled against the wall, a plastic crate holding canned food, socks, and a battered photograph of his daughter from years before they stopped speaking. He did not have much, but what little he had, he shared. He opened a packet of crackers, softened them with water, and watched the puppy eat with desperate little bites. "Slow down," he said gently. "Food's not running away." The puppy looked up at him with rain still clinging to its whiskers, tail giving the smallest uncertain wag. Jack smiled for the first time that night. "Sonny," he decided, though he had no right to name what wasn't his. "You look like you could use some sunshine." Sonny curled against his sleeping bag, while Jack sat beside him, listening to rain pound the highway above. For the first time in months, the space beneath the overpass felt less empty. He slept poorly, waking often to check whether the puppy was still breathing, still warm, still there. Near dawn, the rain softened into mist. Jack packed his few belongings, tucked Sunny inside his jacket, and walked toward a church breakfast program several blocks away. The city was waking now. Buses groaned at corners. Delivery trucks splashed through puddles. Steam rose from coffee shop vents. Sunny watched everything from Jack's arms, alert but exhausted. Near a telephone pole outside a convenience store, Jack stopped so suddenly that a cyclist cursed while swerving around him. A poster flapped beneath a strip of wet tape. Missing child. The photograph showed a smiling little girl with light brown hair, blue eyes, and a gap-toothed grin, holding a pale gold puppy against her chest. Jack stared at the puppy in the picture. Then he looked down at Sunny. Same soft ears, same pink collar, same small white patch beneath the chin. His throat tightened. The girl's name was Lily Anderson, age 9, missing for 3 days. Last seen near Westlake Center with her puppy, Sunny. Jack read the words twice, then a third time, while the city moved around him without slowing. Sunny suddenly lifted his head and whined toward the north, eyes fixed beyond the street as though something invisible had called him. Jack looked from the poster to the puppy and felt the old soldier inside him wake up. The part of him that remembered what it meant when someone was missing and time mattered. He had thought he was saving a stray from the rain. Instead, he was holding the first living clue to a child the whole city was praying to find. Jack tightened his arms around Sunny and whispered, "All right, little buddy, show me where she is." A gray morning fog drifted across downtown Seattle, while cold rain continued to fall lightly from low clouds hanging over Elliott Bay, and Jack Sullivan found himself standing outside a police station holding a puppy that suddenly seemed far more important than either of them had been the day before. The missing child poster remained folded inside his jacket pocket, and he had read it so many times that every detail now felt permanently etched into his memory. Lily Anderson, 9 years old, missing for 3 days. Last seen near Westlake Center, family and authorities requesting any information. The smiling face in the photograph stayed with him as he pushed open the station doors and stepped inside. Several officers looked up briefly before returning to their work. Jack was used to those glances. People often noticed the worn coat, the weathered backpack, and the signs of homelessness before they noticed the man. But when Sunny poked his head out from beneath Jack's arm, one of the reception officers immediately stood. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. Jack carefully unfolded the missing child poster and placed it on the counter. "I think this dog belongs to her." The officer's expression changed instantly. Within minutes, Jack found himself sitting in a small interview room while detectives arrived to ask questions. The lead investigator introduced himself as Detective Ryan Foster, a 45-year-old officer with broad shoulders, short dark hair beginning to gray at the temples, and tired eyes that suggested he had not slept much since Lily disappeared. Foster possessed the calm patience of someone who had spent years working difficult cases. He listened carefully while Jack explained where and how he found Sunny. The detective examined the puppy's collar and immediately recognized it from photographs provided by Lily's family. "This is definitely her dog," Foster said quietly. "No question." Jack nodded. "I figured as much." The detective leaned back slightly. "The problem is where you found him." That concerned Jack too. Lily had vanished near the busy shopping district downtown. Sunny appeared more than 10 miles away beneath an overpass near Pioneer Square. For a puppy barely 6 months old, it seemed unlikely he had traveled that far alone through traffic, crowds, and unfamiliar streets. Something about the situation did not fit. Foster seemed to reach the same conclusion. "We've had hundreds of tips," he admitted. "Most lead nowhere. But this is the first piece of physical evidence we've gotten since the disappearance." Another officer entered carrying a folder. Inside were photographs of Lily and her family. Jack studied them carefully. Lily looked exactly like she had in the missing poster, bright-eyed and cheerful. One photograph showed her sitting on a park bench hugging Sunny tightly while laughing at something beyond the camera. Another showed the puppy asleep across her lap. The bond between them was obvious. "Her mother says they were inseparable," Foster said. Sunny followed her everywhere. The words lingered in Jack's mind. Inseparable. Yet somehow the puppy was here while Lily remained missing. After answering additional questions, Jack expected the detectives to take Sunny and continue their investigation. Instead, an unexpected problem emerged. The city animal shelter was overcrowded. and Lily's family had specifically requested that Sonny remain available in case he became important to the search. Since Jack was the person who found him and the puppy already appeared comfortable around him, the detectives asked whether he could temporarily keep Sonny nearby while they sorted out arrangements. The request surprised him. "You trust me with him?" Foster smiled faintly. "The dog seems to trust you." Jack glanced down at Sonny. The puppy sat quietly beside his chair, leaning against his leg. Somehow that answer felt important. By afternoon, local television stations were broadcasting updates about the investigation. Jack watched from a coffee shop that occasionally allowed him to sit inside during bad weather. Every screen carried Lily's photograph. Reporters discussed possible sightings, search efforts, and community volunteers distributing flyers throughout Seattle. The entire city seemed invested in bringing the little girl home. Yet despite all the attention, no significant breakthroughs emerged. Sonny, however, seemed increasingly restless. Throughout the day, the puppy repeatedly pulled toward the door whenever Jack took him outside. At first, Jack assumed he simply wanted exercise, but after the third or fourth time, the behavior became difficult to ignore. Sonny was not wandering randomly. He consistently tugged in the same general direction, north. Each time Jack stopped, the puppy looked back at him impatiently before pulling again. "What's gotten into you?" Jack asked while kneeling beside him near a bus stop. Sonny whined softly and turned his head toward the distant skyline. Then he pulled once more. Jack frowned. Years ago, during his military service, he had worked alongside search dogs during disaster response operations. He remembered handlers explaining how determined dogs could become when following familiar scents. The memory resurfaced now. Was Sonny trying to find Lily? The idea sounded almost ridiculous. Yet the puppy's behavior felt too purposeful to dismiss entirely. As evening approached, Jack decided to test a theory. Instead of returning toward Pioneer Square, he followed wherever Sonny wanted to go. The puppy immediately became more energetic. His tail lifted, his pace quickened. They moved through several city blocks, crossing busy intersections and weaving between pedestrians. More than once, Sonny paused briefly as though confirming direction before continuing. Nearly an hour later, they reached an area near Seattle's industrial waterfront. Warehouses, shipping yards, and storage facilities lined the streets. Traffic decreased. The surroundings felt quieter, more isolated. Sonny slowed near a chain-link fence bordering an abandoned loading yard. Then he stopped completely. The puppy sniffed the ground intensely. His ears rose. A low whine escaped his throat. Jack looked around carefully. The location appeared ordinary enough. Empty buildings, rusted gates, faded signs. Yet something in Sonny's reaction suggested otherwise. Before Jack could investigate further, a voice called from behind. "That's the missing girl's dog, isn't it?" He turned and saw a woman approaching with a camera hanging from her shoulder. She appeared to be in her mid-30s, with chestnut brown hair pulled into a loose ponytail and sharp hazel eyes that missed very little. Her name, as she quickly introduced herself, was Sarah Brooks, a local investigative reporter who had been covering Lily's disappearance since the first day. She looked from Sonny to Jack and then toward the abandoned yard. "Tell me something," she said. "Am I crazy? Or does it look like that dog is trying to lead you somewhere?" Jack glanced down at Sonny. The puppy remained focused on the fenced property ahead. For the first time since finding him in the rain, Jack felt certain of one thing. Sonny knew something, and whatever it was, they had just taken the first real step toward finding it. A cold wind rolled in from Elliott Bay the next morning, carrying the scent of salt water and rain through Seattle's industrial waterfront, while low clouds hung over the city like a gray blanket. Jack Sullivan had slept very little. His mind kept returning to the abandoned loading yard where Sonny had stopped the previous evening. The puppy's reaction had not looked random. It had looked familiar, purposeful, the same way a person reacts when they recognize something important but cannot explain it. By sunrise, Jack was already walking through the city with Sonny trotting beside him on a borrowed leash provided by Detective Ryan Foster. The puppy appeared far more energetic than he had when Jack first found him. His golden fur had dried and regained some of its natural shine, and the frightened look in his eyes had begun to fade. Yet one thing remained unchanged. Every time they reached an intersection or open area, Sonny would pause briefly before turning toward the northwestern section of the city, as though following an invisible trail. Jack intended to report everything to Detective Foster later that day. But first he wanted to learn whether the behavior continued. He was not alone for long. As promised, Sarah Brooks met him outside a small coffee shop near the waterfront. At 34 years old, Sarah had built a reputation as one of Seattle's most determined investigative reporters. She stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall, with an athletic build, intelligent hazel eyes, and chestnut brown hair usually tied back while working. Unlike many reporters who chased headlines, Sarah had earned respect by focusing on people. She spent time learning names, listening to families, and understanding stories before writing about them. Lily's disappearance had affected her deeply because she had covered too many cases where public attention faded before answers arrived. She looked down at Sonny and smiled. "How's our little detective today?" Sonny wagged his tail briefly before returning his attention toward the street ahead. Sarah laughed softly. "Focused as always." Jack nodded. "He's been pulling in the same direction since yesterday. Then maybe we should see where he wants to go." Together, they followed the puppy through several neighborhoods. At first, the route made little sense. Sonny led them along sidewalks, through public parks, and past rows of apartment buildings. Occasionally, he would stop to sniff a specific area before continuing. Hours passed. The sky darkened with another approaching storm. More than once, Sarah questioned whether they were chasing hope rather than evidence. Yet each time she considered stopping, Sonny displayed the same determination. The puppy never seemed confused, only driven. Around midday, they reached an area near the Duwamish River where old industrial warehouses lined the shoreline. Many buildings stood abandoned after shipping operations moved elsewhere years earlier. Rusted fences surrounded empty lots. Broken windows reflected gray clouds. Few people walked the streets. Sonny suddenly became more alert. His pace quickened noticeably. Jack exchanged a glance with Sarah. "You see that?" "Yeah." The puppy pulled harder on the leash. They followed him down a side street toward a cluster of aging warehouses overlooking the water. Halfway there, Sonny stopped near a patch of gravel between two buildings. He sniffed intensely before whining. Jack crouched beside him. Something caught his attention immediately. A small piece of bright pink fabric lay partially hidden beneath weeds. Sarah carefully picked it up. "This could be nothing," she said. "Or it could belong to a 9-year-old girl." Jack looked toward the warehouses. For the first time, a chill moved through him despite the mild temperature. They photographed the fabric and sent the images to Detective Foster. Less than 10 minutes later, his phone rang. "Don't touch anything else," Foster instructed immediately. "We're sending people." Yet, even after making the report, Sonny refused to leave. The puppy continued pulling toward the largest warehouse near the end of the street. The structure stood 3 stories tall with faded brick walls and boarded windows. Officially, it had been vacant for years. Unofficially, several recent tire tracks crossed the gravel nearby. Sarah noticed them too. "That's interesting." Jack nodded slowly. "Very." They remained outside while waiting for detectives to arrive. During that time, Sonny circled the warehouse perimeter repeatedly. At one point, he stopped near a side entrance and began scratching lightly at the metal door. Not barking, not playing, scratching. The behavior immediately caught Jack's attention. "What is it, buddy?" Sonny whined softly and pressed his nose against the door seam. Sarah's expression changed. "You don't think." Neither finished the thought. 20 minutes later, Detective Foster arrived with several officers. After examining the area, they discovered additional signs of recent activity. Footprints, vehicle tracks, food wrappers less than 2 days old. None proved Lily had been there. But together they painted a troubling picture. Someone had definitely been using the supposedly abandoned property. Foster studied Sonny carefully. "This dog keeps finding things." Jack looked down at the puppy. "Feels more like he's remembering things." The detective considered that. "Maybe." As officers continued examining the area, Sarah received a phone call from one of her newsroom contacts. The information she learned immediately changed the investigation. 2 nights before Lily disappeared, security cameras near a convenience store several blocks away captured footage of a dark cargo van repeatedly driving through the area. The same van had also appeared near the waterfront warehouse district. The connection was thin, but it existed. Foster listened carefully before making several calls of his own. Suddenly, what began as a missing child case started looking much larger. By late afternoon, additional law enforcement personnel arrived. Search warrants were being prepared. Investigators reviewed surveillance footage. The warehouse district became the center of attention. Through all of it, Sunny remained focused on the same building. As rain began falling again, Jack sat beneath an awning watching the puppy stare toward the warehouse door. Something about the sight touched him deeply. Most people saw a cheerful young dog. Jack saw loyalty, the kind that refused to quit even when nobody else understood. Hours earlier, the city had almost no new leads. Now they had evidence, a location, and a direction. None of it would have happened without Sunny. Then, just before sunset, the puppy suddenly stood. His ears rose sharply. His body became rigid. Every muscle tightened. He was looking toward a narrow service road behind the warehouse. A dark vehicle had just appeared at the far end of the street. Jack felt his pulse quicken. So did Detective Foster, because for the first time since Lily vanished, it looked like someone connected to her disappearance might finally be coming back. Cold rain swept across Seattle's waterfront that evening, turning the streets of the warehouse district into shimmering ribbons of reflected light, while dark clouds rolled in from Puget Sound. Every officer near the abandoned warehouse immediately focused on the dark vehicle creeping down the narrow service road. Jack Sullivan stood beneath the awning with Sunny pressed against his leg, while Detective Ryan Foster watched through binoculars from behind an unmarked police SUV. The vehicle moved slowly, almost cautiously, before stopping near the rear entrance of the warehouse that Sunny had spent hours investigating. For several long seconds, nobody emerged. Then a man stepped out. He appeared to be in his 40s, wearing a dark rain jacket and baseball cap pulled low over his face. He glanced around briefly before unlocking a side door and disappearing inside. Foster lowered the binoculars. "Interesting," he muttered. Several officers immediately moved to document the arrival. The warehouse had officially been vacant for years, yet someone clearly possessed access to the building. Combined with the fabric fragment, vehicle tracks, and Sunny's repeated reactions, the location was becoming impossible to ignore. Sarah Brooks stood nearby, holding her camera but keeping a respectful distance from the investigation. The experienced reporter understood when to observe and when to stay out of the way. "Do you think this is connected?" she asked quietly. Foster nodded. "At this point, I'd be surprised if it wasn't." Search warrants that normally might have taken days were approved within hours due to the circumstances surrounding the missing child investigation. By nightfall, officers entered the warehouse for the first official search. Jack remained outside with Sunny while detectives moved through the building. The wait felt endless. Rain drummed against metal roofs. Harbor fog drifted between abandoned structures. Every passing minute seemed heavier than the last. Finally, Foster emerged. His expression was serious. "We found signs someone was here recently." Jack stood. "Lily?" The detective shook his head. "Not directly, but we found temporary bedding, food supplies, and evidence that multiple people have been using the warehouse." Sarah stepped closer. "Anything else?" Foster hesitated. "Several children's drawings." The words settled heavily in the cold air. Jack looked down at Sunny. The puppy remained focused on the warehouse door, ears raised as if listening for something beyond human hearing. The discovery changed everything. What initially appeared to be a possible hiding place now suggested something far more disturbing. Investigators expanded their search beyond the warehouse itself. Nearby buildings were examined. Security footage from surrounding businesses was collected. Vehicle records were reviewed. The operation quickly grew into one of the largest investigations Seattle authorities had conducted in years. Yet, despite the progress, one question remained unanswered. Where was Lily? The next morning, a breakthrough arrived from an unexpected source. Sarah received a call from one of her contacts at the Port of Seattle. A security worker remembered seeing a little girl matching Lily's description several days earlier near a restricted industrial area not far from the warehouse district. According to the witness, the child appeared frightened and was accompanied by two unfamiliar adults. The sighting had not seemed important at the time. Now it became critical. Detective Foster immediately dispatched investigators to re-examine the area. Meanwhile, Sunny grew increasingly restless. Throughout the day, he repeatedly pulled toward the northern edge of the waterfront whenever Jack walked him outside. The behavior felt different from before, more urgent, more determined. By afternoon, Jack trusted the puppy enough to follow without question. Sarah joined him. Together, they moved through industrial streets lined with shipping containers and aging warehouses. Rain continued falling lightly, while cargo cranes loomed above the harbor like giant shadows. Then Sunny stopped. The puppy stood perfectly still near an abandoned storage facility overlooking the water. Unlike the previous warehouse, this location appeared completely forgotten. Rust covered the gates. Weeds pushed through cracked pavement. Several windows were boarded shut. Yet Sunny refused to move. He stared at the building. Then he whined softly. Jack's instincts immediately sharpened. "Something's here." Sarah nodded. "I feel it too." Before either could investigate further, Detective Foster called. His voice carried an excitement Jack had not heard before. "We found the van." Jack straightened. "What?" "The one from the surveillance footage." Foster paused. "And we found out who owns it." The owner was a man named Victor Hale, a 48-year-old former shipping contractor with a history of financial crimes and several connections to suspicious activities around the Seattle waterfront. Nothing had ever been serious enough to result in long-term imprisonment, but investigators now had reason to believe Hale was involved in something much larger. More importantly, records connected him directly to the abandoned storage facility where Sunny had stopped. Jack looked toward the building. "We're standing outside one of his properties right now." Silence followed. Then Foster spoke quickly. "Stay where you are. We're coming." Within 30 minutes, police vehicles quietly surrounded the area. Tactical officers moved into position while investigators coordinated their approach. Jack remained behind the perimeter with Sarah and Sunny. The puppy sat unusually still. His eyes never left the storage facility. As darkness approached, officers entered the property. Minutes felt like hours. Nobody spoke. Then radio traffic suddenly exploded with activity. Officers were moving. Doors were opening. Teams were clearing rooms. Sarah gripped her camera tightly. Jack held Sunny close. Finally, Detective Foster's voice came across the radio. "We found evidence." The words brought immediate relief. Not because the case was over, but because they were finally moving in the right direction. Inside the building, investigators discovered personal belongings linked to Lily. A backpack, a jacket, several items positively identified by her family. Most importantly, there were signs the child had been there recently. Very recently. Yet Lily herself was gone. The realization was both encouraging and heartbreaking. They were close. Closer than they had ever been. But time was running short. As officers continued processing the scene, Sunny rested his head against Jack's knee. The old veteran looked down at the puppy and gently scratched behind his ears. "You got us this far," he whispered. Sunny lifted his head and looked toward the darkness beyond the waterfront. Somewhere out there, Lily was still waiting. And judging by the determination in the puppy's eyes, the search was far from over. The biggest clue of all was still ahead of them. A cold mist hung over Seattle before dawn, drifting across the waterfront and wrapping the city in a blanket of gray silence, while investigators worked through the night following every lead connected to Lily Anderson's disappearance. The discovery of her backpack and personal belongings inside the abandoned storage facility had transformed the investigation. For the first time since the 9-year-old girl vanished, law enforcement knew they were no longer searching blindly. They were following a trail. Yet every hour that passed increased the urgency. Detective Ryan Foster had spent most of the night coordinating teams across the city while federal and local agencies shared information connected to Victor Hale and several associates tied to his operations along the waterfront. Jack Sullivan remained at a temporary command center established near the harbor. Despite having no official role in the investigation, nobody questioned his presence anymore. The homeless veteran and the small golden puppy beside him had become part of the story. More importantly, they had become part of the search. Sunny slept briefly beneath a folding table before waking just after sunrise. The puppy immediately became alert. Jack noticed the change at once. For several days, he had learned to recognize the difference between normal curiosity and something more meaningful. This was the second one. Sunny stood, stretched, and walked directly toward the exit of the command center. Then he looked back. Waiting. "You got something?" Jack asked quietly. The puppy whined and moved toward the door again. Nearby officers exchanged glances. Even Detective Foster paused. Nobody laughed anymore when the dog reacted to something. Sunny had already led them to evidence everyone else missed. Foster walked over. "Where's he trying to go?" Jack clipped on the leash. "Only one way to find out." Within minutes, a small group accompanied them through the harbor district. The city was slowly waking. Ferries crossed Elliott Bay. Delivery trucks moved through industrial streets. Seagulls circled overhead. Yet Sunny ignored everything except the direction ahead. The puppy pulled steadily northward along a route that eventually left the busiest parts of Seattle behind. As they moved farther from downtown, the surroundings changed. Warehouses gave way to smaller commercial buildings. Then those gave way to stretches of woodland and undeveloped property near the city's northern outskirts. The farther they traveled, the more focused Sunny became. Nearly 2 hours later, the puppy suddenly stopped near an old maintenance road hidden behind a line of trees. Detective Foster studied the area carefully. "What's out there?" One of the officers checked a map. Several abandoned service buildings from an old utility project. Most have been empty for years. Sunny immediately pulled toward the road. His tail remained stiff. His ears stood high. Jack felt his pulse quicken. The behavior reminded him of the first night he found the puppy in the rain. Determined. Certain. As additional units quietly moved into position, investigators advanced along the narrow road. Trees blocked most of the view ahead. The area felt isolated despite being less than an hour from downtown Seattle. Then they saw it. A small cluster of buildings partially hidden among evergreens. One structure appeared recently occupied. Tire tracks crossed the muddy ground. A vehicle sat parked beside a shed. Foster immediately signaled for everyone to stop. The operation shifted instantly from search to rescue. Officers spread out. Radios crackled softly. Tactical teams approached from multiple directions. Jack remained behind the perimeter with Sunny, but he could feel the tension building around him. Somewhere ahead, answers waited. Minutes later, the operation began. Officers moved swiftly toward the buildings. Commands echoed through the trees. Doors opened. Teams entered. For several long seconds, nobody outside knew what was happening. Then a radio transmission broke the silence. "We found her." Jack closed his eyes. Relief flooded through him so quickly he almost lost his balance. Nearby officers smiled. Others simply exhaled. Detective Foster lowered his head for a moment before speaking into the radio. "Status?" The reply came immediately. "Lily is safe." Jack looked down at Sunny. The puppy's tail began wagging wildly for the first time all morning, almost as if he already knew. 20 minutes later, an ambulance crew escorted a small figure from one of the buildings. Lily Anderson looked tired and frightened, but she was safe. The moment she stepped outside, her eyes searched the crowd. Then she saw Sunny. "Sunny!" The little girl broke into tears. The puppy slipped free from Jack's hands and sprinted across the clearing. What followed brought tears to nearly everyone watching. Sunny launched himself into Lily's arms while she wrapped both arms around his neck. Neither seemed willing to let go. Weeks of fear, confusion, and separation disappeared in that single moment. Lily buried her face in the puppy's fur, while Sunny covered her cheeks with excited kisses. "I knew you'd find me," she whispered through tears. "I knew you'd come." Even Detective Foster turned away briefly to hide emotion. A short time later, Lily's parents arrived. Her mother, Emma Anderson, rushed forward the instant she saw her daughter. The reunion was powerful enough to silence everyone nearby. After days of uncertainty and fear, their family was together again. Investigators later learned that Lily had accidentally witnessed criminal activity connected to Victor Hale's smuggling operation near the waterfront. Fearing she would report what she saw, Hale's associates took her and moved her between several locations while deciding what to do. The situation might have continued much longer if Sunny had not escaped and eventually found Jack. News of the rescue spread rapidly throughout Seattle. Television stations interrupted programming. Social media exploded with celebration. For days, reporters covered every detail of the story. Yet one person received almost as much attention as Lily herself. Jack Sullivan, the homeless veteran who stopped in the rain when everyone else kept walking. Journalists wanted interviews. Community organizations offered assistance. Local veterans groups reached out. For the first time in many years, people saw him, not as a homeless man beneath an overpass, but as a person whose kindness changed lives. A month later, on a bright autumn afternoon, Jack stood in a small park overlooking Elliott Bay while Sunny chased a tennis ball nearby. Lily and her parents had invited him for lunch. The city skyline glowed beneath rare blue skies. Children laughed on nearby playgrounds. Life felt lighter somehow. Lily ran over with Sunny bounding beside her. "He still likes you best," she teased. Jack laughed. "Don't tell him that. He'll get a big head." Sunny dropped the ball at Jack's feet and wagged his tail. Jack looked out across the water and smiled. He had saved a puppy from a cold, rainy night because it was the right thing to do. He never expected that simple act of kindness would help bring a little girl home, change his own life, and remind an entire city that sometimes heroes are found in the places people least expect. And as Sunny rested beside him while the sun dipped toward the horizon, Jack realized something beautiful. Neither of them had been lost after all. They had simply been leading each other toward home. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive in grand and obvious ways. Sometimes they come wrapped in a cold rainstorm, hidden inside a small act of kindness that seems insignificant at the time. On the night Jack Sullivan stopped to help a shivering puppy in a Seattle alley, he believed he was simply saving an animal from the cold. He had no way of knowing that God was placing him at the center of a miracle that would help bring a missing child back to her family. This story reminds us that every person matters in God's eyes. Society often overlooked Jack because he was homeless. Many people walked past him every day without seeing the man behind the worn coat and weathered backpack. But God saw him. God saw his compassion, his courage, and the goodness that remained in his heart despite years of hardship. And when the right moment came, God used that kindness to change lives. The same is true in our own lives. We never know when a small decision, a kind word, a helping hand, a moment of compassion might become part of something much bigger than ourselves. The world often measures people by their status, appearance, or success. But God measures the heart. Sometimes the person everyone overlooks becomes the one who makes the greatest difference. Sunny's loyalty also reminds us of something beautiful. Love does not give up. Faith does not give up. Hope does not give up. Even when Lily was missing, her little puppy never stopped trying to find a way back to her. In the same way, God never stops searching for us when we feel lost, alone, or forgotten. His love continues to guide us, even when we cannot see the path ahead. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Have you ever experienced a moment when a simple act of kindness changed someone's life or your own? We'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories about faith, hope, second chances, and the extraordinary ways God works through ordinary people. May God bless you and your family, watch over those you love, and remind you every day that no act of kindness is ever wasted. And may you never forget that sometimes the miracle you've been praying for begins with simply stopping to help someone in need.